Good afternoon and welcome to an FS Club webinar coming from the southeast of England. I'm Michael Mainelli here in London, and our guest today, Terry Downing, based as he claims in darkest Cambridgeshire. And we're here today to talk about a journey to operational resilience with a particular emphasis, of course, on Tony's really leading role, and he's done a lot of leading work in the field as resilience manager and head of operational resilience at Legal & General. And we'll get into that in just a moment. Now, you'll know me, I'm Michael Mainelli, I'm one of the directors of Zien, and I really am delighted to be able to introduce so many of these FS Club webinars where we range widely and freely across technology, economics, and finance. And today is definitely about finance and technology, maybe a little bit less than usual on the economics, but we can only do so because our sponsors, as you can see listed here, allow us to range widely and freely across the field. But today is pretty much core territory for us. And I might add on to that, a teensy bit of regulation lies ahead in today's presentations. Now, the agenda, for those of you who are regulars, is fairly well known. Many of our webinars give our presenter about 20 minutes to get their argument there, and then we're looking forward to 20 hard minutes from you, grilling him on the things that interest you and his reaction to them. I might make three quick points before we jump into the heart of the matter. Yes, this is being recorded and it will be available in approximately 2 working days. So sometime over the weekend when you have nothing to do, you can have a good look at this or share with friends and colleagues. Secondly, the slides are available. In fact, they're already posted and up on the website. Terry is ever so good. But very finally, how do I participate in the Q&A? And that's you use the GoToWebinar Q&A facility, which is here. I'm here with you and with Terry, not on Signal or Teams or email. Please ask your questions via the Q&A facility. All of your questions, if we don't get enough time, will be going to Terry with your email attached, and he can answer them if he pleases. So if there's a point of connection you'd like to make, or congratulate him on a great presentation, or ask a detailed question, they will all go to Terry after we're finished. I thought I'd get that out of the way. Now, Terry did in fact ask us if we would have a poll amongst the audience before we get going, and I'm just about to launch that poll now. And it's basically just to get a flavor for things, you know, in financial services. Now that Brexit is passed, do you, as a financial services professional, expect to see more or less regulation? Now, Terry, the audience here is highly skilled. At least at the GoToWebinar Q&A facility, over 50% of the audience have already made up their minds, and I'm going to leave the voting open for just another 15 seconds so that we capture a few more there, up to the 75% mark. Just get your votes in quickly, folks. They are fairly fast off the buttons. Here we go. I'm now going to close that and share the results, Terry, and it's interesting. So the much vaunted Brexit dividends are certainly not there. The audience is almost perfectly split around much the same. I can see that we're not exactly the most optimistic of people. Now, Peter and Terry are going to swap slides around and take back control there. And as soon as we've done that, Terry, the floor is very much going to be yours. So over to you.
Okay, and thank you, Michael, and thank you for this fantastic opportunity. As Michael said, my name is Terry Downing, and I'm the Resilience Manager, and I'm the Head of Operational Resilience for Group Technology for Legal & General. And my presentation today is called A Journey to Operational Resilience. It's about what I've been doing for the last few years. Just like Michael, I like my badges on the as I've shown on the bottom of the screen. But the badges aren't there just to show that I'm current. It's actually to show that operational resilience isn't just business continuity. It's not about ITIL. It's not just about cyber. It's about the whole holistic approach, and we're going to take this journey. And I just wanted to make sure that I stated that these are my personal observations and views, and not necessarily those of my current management or previous management. So with less than anything, let me see if the technology works. Like every other presentation, when we start talking about regulations, there's a timeline, and I'm going to talk about the who, what, why, what we've got to do, and why it's important. And back in 2007, we had the global financial crisis. and it was the worst one since the Great Depression of 1920s, 29. And it took another 10 years after that before Basel came around and produced their finalizing post-crisis reforms, and where it was identified that citizens and markets had lost faith in banks. And then in 2020, Basel came up with their principles for operational resilience, which is about improving the operational resilience for financial institutions. Our own PRA came up with the PRA rulebook. There was policy statements, and there was supervisory statements made, and it was all about impacts, operational resilience and impacts of tolerances for important business services. And everybody's going, what is the important business service? Well, we're going to go into that. And what's coming along down the road is DORA, Digital Operational Resilience Act, from the European Union, which is more focused on the technical side, although the current regulations also has a technical element. This is really on the digital side of operational resilience for financial institutions. Where they came from? Where did they come from, should I say? Well, every single financial authority has had a go at this. They've contributed it from the EBA, from Basel, EBA, the international boards, each country's own organisations, the PRA that we've got here, the Prudential Regulatory Authority, and the Financial Conduct Authority. And the guidelines came into force back in 2019, but at the end of last month, the regulations came into force, and people are going, oh, we've got to have it all up and running, and that's not quite what the regulations state. But these organisations have all got together, and it doesn't matter where you operate. If you want to operate in these markets, even from your own market, you actually have to comply with the regulations of the areas that you're dealing with. So there's a little bit of a harmonisation that needs to be done, but I wanted to point out here that these have come from the financial authorities. But what does it really say? I'm not going to read this out as a whole screen, but I wanted to show to you that from the EBC, and this is a high-level extract that I took out of that, it talks about business continuity. Organizational resilience is basically business continuity on steroids. Instead of turning around and saying, right, my systems are at this height, when I have an incident, I'm going to recover my systems and there's going to be a block, right? Operational resilience means that you continue to provide service. Maybe the service is at a predefined level, but you don't drop the service. And we talk about not making intolerable harm to citizens. The whole of the regulations goes, first of all, to the citizens, the markets, the economies, then the government, because the government actually has to make sure its economy is safe, because otherwise it doesn't get tax revenues and it actually pays out more. So financial regulations and robustness of the finances is that important. And then there's the firms themselves. But we are talking about value to the citizen. We're talking about an holistic approach to delivery. And we really are talking about, from this point of view, right, the boards, if you look at the regulations, it turns around and says, it rests, the ultimate responsibility rests with the organization's board of directors, right? It's about making sure that your staff are trained up, that you have plans, that you actually have done your critical path analysis and your critical resource analysis, the BI. And it also turns around and says that you can't outsource to a third party the risk. You can outsource the requirements, but you still own the risk. Now, what I turn around and say is operational resilience is not a compliance thing. It's not that at all. It's business risk management, and it's about the intent and the outcomes. The moment you start talking about business risk management, it takes it away from a tick in the box exercise and puts it more into the frame of what do we need to do. And we're all moving forward into this, what we call this digital world. And we've got these new ways of working. Traditionally, we had very much of a product focus. It was transactional in the relationship. It was one and done. Once I created it and I had a process, as long as I kept the quality going, it went on, and I didn't really know, but the businesses didn't really know their consumers, right? And that was an example of that I put on there is Microsoft Office. Microsoft Office sold off-the-shelf products. It was a software product, not a SaaS service as it is today. They didn't know who their customer was. They knew who was buying it from a bulk point of view, but they didn't know. Their business was repeatable. It was a standard quality. They had a stovepipe organizational approach, like most industries, where basically it was these different departments were delivering it. And their approach to delivery was waterfall. The problem with that traditional business model is that it's slow to turn. There's so many moving parts and so many different organizations. And the other thing about those days is pre-internet, there was very little that we had to worry about a cyber attack. Now we're in the digital transformation age. And I have to say, it's not about the app. Not about the app at all. We're more service focused. We want to know our individual customers and partners. It's not a one and done anymore. It's tailored. We need to know the customer. And again, using Microsoft as an example, Office 365, Microsoft knows all their customers, knows a lot about them now, knows when you work, knows how much data you use, what you go surfing. It's a repeatable model. It's standard, but it's also tailored. It's still quality. Now looking at the value stream rather than an off-the-shelf product, they can be agile because they can actually move a lot quicker. Right? It's now a holistic way to deliver business. They can change their business model quite quickly, as we've seen with various areas that we're in. The problem is the other side of operational resilience and digital, the other side of being digital transformation is, on the other side of the coin, is operational resilience. Because what you have is that by going digital, you increase your cyber attack surfaces. So we actually have to be more aware of our operational involvement. We have to be aware of what's being delivered to us. We have to know who's delivering it. We have to know what their commitments to. And the other thing is that whereas before it's always been the big eats the small, it's not that anymore. It's the quick eats the slow. Right? Digital brings that. So your operational resilience has to take this into account. Again, we're not talking about bits and bytes. We're not talking about business continuity plans. We're talking about operational resilience.
Good.
So what do you need to know? Well, in operational resilience, the first thing they say is you need to know, identify your important business services. And the question I will ask, who's it important to? Now, I have seen organizations that have gone, oh, this is my most important business system. It's not about the business system. It's about the service that's given to the consumer, to the citizen at the end. It's there. What do you deliver? What are you putting to the market? That's your important business service. It's maybe made up of 15 to 20 different components within your organization. But at the end of the day, it's an holistic delivery of services to your customer. Looking at it from a customer point of view and a consumer point of view, you then have to look at setting impact tolerances. Now, an impact tolerance, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a later slide, but it's not your RTOs and your RPOs, recovery time objectives, recovery point objectives. This is about the impact tolerance of the consumer. How, before you do any harm, and we'll talk about harm, as I said, in a later slide. The next thing you have to do, having identified your important business services and set your impact tolerances, right, you actually have to turn around and say, right, I need to map how I deliver that. What's all the components, the critical path and the critical path analysis, or your value stream in ITIL terms. You actually have to turn around and say, to deliver that service, what do I need to deliver it? And you map that all out, and that might be people, it might be systems, it might be locations, it might be computers, it might be data, it might be an outside external force that you're using, it might be a company that used to do just in time, now it's just in case delivery of product, right? And you map that out and you see what the critical, and then once you've got that all set, you set the impact tolerance to see whether or not you can make your master impact tolerance to your end customer and identify any vulnerabilities. And once you've mapped that out, you have to conduct lessons learned and testing it. You have to identify the prioritization. You actually have to make sure you invest in your ability to respond and recover. And again, this is where operational resilience becomes holistic, because it doesn't matter whether it's a building, whether it's a transportation problem, whether it's a power problem, whether it's a cybersecurity problem, whether it's a public PR problem. It's all about actually conducting those risk assessments, those impact analyses, that exercising of what you're going to do. And then the other thing is that you must develop a communications plan. And that communications is between you and your customers, you and your partners, the regulators. And then the final thing the operational resilience asks you to do is actually do self-assessment. And that's an annual basis. This is marking your own homework, but there's going to be ways that they're going to actually look at you and turn around and say, excuse me, we now want to do a bit more detail. So you've got a self-assessment, but also external. So this IBS, when we set the impact tolerance, firms identify their important business services, map to the successful delivery. They then attest their ability to withstand a severe event. Now, the wording is a plausible but severe event or incident, right? So the way I look at it, it isn't actually whether it's a thunderstorm or a flood. The way I look at it, it's more about if you lost something. Don't care how you've lost it, but what if you've lost that data center? What if you've lost access to that building for 5 days? Not how it's done. You use the scenarios of floods, pandemics as a test, an acid test for that. But you don't actually plan for that. You plan for the loss of. And you don't plan from it from a technical point of view. You plan from it from a service to your customer point of view. So if your data center is down for 5 days, how are you going to make sure you don't miss your impact, breach your impact tolerances? How do you make sure you can continue to deliver what you've promised to deliver to your consumers? And that third part of that is listed here. You've got to make sure that your test results actually identifying your gaps. You've got to make your investment choices, but look at it as the point of view, I have lost that, not how I've lost it. Acid test afterwards. I've had a train strike, my staff can't get in. How do I deal with that? There's been national power cuts. My remote working no longer works. How do I deal with that? And then it might be a fuel shortage and a data shortage at the same time. The people at the Operational Resilience Collaboration Group have written this based on the guidelines from the FCA. I'm not going to go into great detail. You can read these on the slides later. But if you look at the top one, intolerable harm is what we talk about. Now, there's various things about litigation and stuff like that. But the most important thing is an impact causing significant distress to the end investor or consumer. Right? When you look at that, that's the others are important, but that's the one. And that's where you have to turn around and say, what do you look at? Well, you actually have to look at your vulnerable consumers, right? It's no good looking at somebody who spends £50 on lunch and saying £50 doesn't matter, compared to a pensioner who £50 actually means the difference between whether or not they eat that week or put the lights on. So you actually have to look at it from your vulnerable customers, and the FCA have actually put that information out. And there's a link on the slides for you to follow if you need to do that. There's more information here about by when. Well, it said it's the 31st of March 2022, and then you've got until 31st of March 2025 to do it. The financial regulator didn't expect or doesn't expect everybody to actually have it down, tied all the way down. There's going to be a development phase. There's going to be changes. There's going to be investment in systems. But what they want you to do was define those IBSs. They might be not right the first time round, but define them. Define your impact tolerances and try and map out. But it didn't have to be complete for 2022. but it does have to be complete for 2025. So take the time. Again, there's the publication at the bottom there that you can look at. And the testing. I heard somebody turn around and say that you have to test every IBS for every scenario every year. Great if you're an organization that actually makes money out of doing the testing and facilitating that. Not so good if you're the financial institution or the supplier to that financial institution who actually has to work on those tests. But the regulations stated in the policy statement, it actually turned around and said, and I'll read it, so our finals rules do not require testing to be undertaken at least every year as proposed. Instead, firms are required to scenario test when there's a material change, following improvements by the firm in response to a previous test, and in any event on a regular basis. Now, a regular basis, when I was doing ISO 22301, the regular basis was once every 3 years, not once a year, right? So let's be practical about this. Let's focus on the IBSs, let's focus on the consumer, and let's actually make sure that when we do this, we do it for the right reasons and we don't actually force ourselves into a situation that's impossible for us to manage. Again, the frequency of testing slide is there for you. Right. Contingency planning. What does it mean? I turn around and said, and I argued that a company only needs one exit plan for its third-party providers, right? It needs one exit plan with information for every major, material supplier. It needs one exit plan that's based on your incident response function. It doesn't need to be something different, because if you were to lose a major supplier, right, the first thing you'll see is it's an incident. The second thing you'll turn around and do is you create your silver team. The silver team will put a team of people together and you will deal with it. And the first thing you'll do is go to contract, right? And you'll turn around and say, right, I've got to bring it in-house, I've got to find another supplier, right? But the only one that you have to really concern with is a stressed exit, because if it's a non-stressed exit, it's down to contract. So focus on that. Focus on the, and you can do a test exercise on it. And I'm very conscious that I'm running out of time, so I'm going to be as quick as possible. Again, my thoughts are on the slides that you can read. Oops. I'm not going to read these out, but these are my tips. These are my tips for operational resilience. Hopefully you'll find them useful. I'm not going to go through them because I've got 1 minute and 28 seconds, and Michael will be hitting me with the proverbial stick. But hopefully the information that I've shared with you, there's a lot more we can go into greater detail. But for a 20-minute session, I think that we've covered a very, very important topic in a very short period of time. And Michael, I think we've got one more question that we wanted to ask.
Actually, I was thinking, Terry, maybe we'll just ask that a little bit later after we've had a bit of discussion. But thank you for reminding me. I appreciate it. And may I congratulate you on sticking absolutely promptly to time. Puts you well up in our favorite category. And I can tell from the number of questions I've got here from the audience, you're also up in their favorite category. Folks, we do have quite a large audience out there, so please do get your questions in early if you'd like me to throw them into the conversation. Now, just to get things going, Terry, one of the things that you and I spoke about when we were having a look at this in advance was this is a lot of stuff. I mean, 3 years, testing every scenario. This is big firm stuff. I mean, it's what the sort of jokes that big firms go through running 3-year mega projects. How true is that?
I think organizations have created new functions to deal with this, but a couple of years ago, there wasn't many of us who would actually turn around and say we're operational resilience professionals. I know, oh, sorry, that's me. My organization that I have, we have loads of operational resilience professionals that didn't exist before. I think that organizations are looking at the fact that they've got to do this, and this is a must-have for the business. If you don't do it, you won't be in the thing. I think it needs some maturity to actually to go forward. I think it needs to be more accountable for how can we make this more cost-effective for business? How can we make it work for not only the large global organizations, but also for the smaller niche financial institutions who don't have who have outsourced nearly everything. Like it's one of the beauties of digital transformation is that you don't need a data center anymore. You don't need a large IT group. The downside to that is that you don't necessarily know what to do if your IT is not there.
Yeah. Terry, it's interesting. You've spoken today in many ways about the boundaries between regulation and effectively the technical firms we've become. And what I find interesting in that, of course, is in a funny way, regulators are now regulating software development and deployment, which is something that is not really where they began. I've got a few questions here along similar lines. So let's start with Charlotte Binstead. Charlotte, I think, makes an excellent point here. Well done, Charlotte. Do you think that tech complexity in financial services is an equal, if less sexy, threat to cyber attacks? What I like about it is I remember back in the 80s, I worked for a firm which had a mantra, which was simplify, then automate, then integrate. In other words, don't try and automate right away. Simplify the processes and procedures first. Thoughts on that relationship between complexity and threat and complexity in tech and finance?
I agree with what you just said, Ben, about you've got to simplify before you automate and integrate. You've got to get and dealing with the financial regulations. You need to get it right for one IBS before you start. The beauty of technology, the beauty is that it makes things quicker and less expensive to run, because you don't need to have the number of people there. We actually create other jobs for them to do, but it's not a manual process. The problem with that is, and it's why I said earlier about as we go through digital transformation, the flip side of that is that you've got an increased attack surface. Not only have you got that, is that you've got, whereas you could shut the door in your building and stop people coming in, you can't do that at 5 o'clock. You can't do that on the internet. The converse of that is that when you do shut down the internet, right, when you shut down your presence, your competition is only one click away. So, and it's proven from all business studies that I've read that your customer only has to go away once and have a good experience, and it's hard to get them to come back to you. So, do we actually have a bigger attack surface? Yes. Do we need to be more I can't think of the word I'm saying. Do we have to be more protective of our systems and services? Yeah, because we don't know what the next attack is. We don't know who's going to attack us, right? It could be an inside job. It could. I was at a seminar recently where apparently on the dark web, people are being offered millions of dollars to go and join companies, to be employees, and just upload a piece of virus software in a new company. And that's quite, for a lot of people, that's quite an interesting proposition. So we don't know where those things are going to come from. But technical complexity increases our threat surface. If we can't manage it and monitor it, if we can't monitor it, we can't manage it, and we can't protect it.
Hugh Purser points here, you spoke about know your customer versus know your customer's digital footprint. Now that's got a lot of interesting implications for Hugh. The first is, you might characterize know your customer as meet and greet. Okay, so they're live, they're living, it's all quite good. But the digital footprint, there's no need to meet. This is a big change in both the delivery of the service, but I would argue also in violating effectively regulatory risk conventions. How much effort do you need to do? But anyway, your thoughts there. Do you see this as a big change in the delivery of the service, or is it more the regulator catching up with what we're doing already?
I think a lot of this is more the regulator trying to catch up with what's going on in the marketplace. And it's like everything else that's happening with the old world that's going digital. The old days of bank managers, the bank manager knew my father, knew me, knew all the people in the family, knew the village, was well known by everybody. Now nobody knows their bank manager, right? But you have more services which are 24/7. You know, you can pay for something, you can transfer things, you can authorize payments. Yeah, we've moved on. The thing is now, individually as consumers, we may not know the person who's selling to us anymore, right? Because we don't have a name to a face. But the companies that are supplying us know a hell of a lot more. I mean, they turn around and say Tesco's knows more about us as individuals than, say, the government knows. Mm. Yeah, so it's a swap, isn't it? Whereas before we knew who was providing the services to us. Now we don't know so much, but they know a lot more about us.
Mm. Mm. You had a really interesting slide on impact tolerance, and I've got two questions related to that. Coming from Elizabeth, who lives in East London, and the first question is just in a nutshell, a quick one. But you mentioned the Operational Resilience Collaboration Group. Could you just describe that quickly to the audience? And I do mean in a nutshell.
It's an organisation that works with the PRA, I believe, and they published articles on the internet, and basically they've created a lot of articles that you can actually go and get off the internet and use to help you. It's a body. Okay,
that was it. But in that slide, what you did speak about was intolerable harm. I found that interesting. Intolerable harm was an impact causing significant distress to the end investor. Now, many years ago, I was involved in trying to get some payments on some pre-war German bonds. And the German government decided to institute into law the idea that the bonds could be paid out, but anybody claiming that they wanted payment had to produce evidence of hardship. And it sounded like a good thing at the time. Now, of course, in 1946, hardship was a poor widow with 8 children clinging to her apron strings. And by the mid-60s, hardship was, I can't afford my 3rd Porsche. In other words, it's all in the eye of the beholder there, and relevant things. How much handle do you think the regulator has on what is distress to an end investor?
The link to the document there on the guidance for firms on fair treatment of vulnerable customers actually helps, it indicates how firms should actually identify those individuals that are vulnerable. And the other thing is that a lot of organizations by law now actually have to have a list of their vulnerable customers and identified them. So it shouldn't be that difficult to understand that. But from a financial point of view, if you're dealing with, as I used an example, with people that you're paying £50 a week to in their pension, right, you're paying them £50 a week. For a pensioner, that means a lot of money. For most pensioners, difference between especially now, turning your lights on or feeding or something of that nature. But the people that you and I, right, when we go out and we spend 50 quid on a lunch or something like that, if we were to get 50 quid this week, it wouldn't make that much difference to us. Right? So you actually have to, when you start looking at the regulations, and I think that's one of the things that the regulator is starting to do, it's actually going, prove to me that you've looked at your vulnerable customers, that you've identified them, and that you've not looked at it from the point of view of, well, it's only 50 quid.
Okay. Got a couple of questions here from Bob McDowell of an interesting nature. And by the way, folks, if you look in the chat bar, you'll see that Brett McGowan has very kindly dug out a link for us to the Operational Resilience Collaboration Group, which you can click on as well. So thank you very much, Brett. So Bob's curious here. Firstly, Terry, do you think that enterprises should place a greater emphasis on pausing their digital development by more focused stage testing? You know, are we rushing too much? Are we in too much of continuous development to actually stop? I mean, and to be fair, you know, if you've got a 3-year program, surely you could build in very rigorous stage gates.
I don't think anything should pause or stop. I think we can take a very agile approach with this, right? We've got the businesses it's running at the moment. We know that we can continue with the existing business. We can identify your IBSs. We can identify the service value chain from that. And then you can actually do proportional improvements, because you're not going to do it overnight, in an agile way. It's better to do it in small steps than because if you, as I mentioned earlier, if you do it in a waterfall approach, by the time you've actually made the change, it's too late. So actually identifying bite-sized chunks that you can make improvements, because the regulator, my view in conversations, the regulator is going to turn around and say, as long as you can see improvement, that's good. It's where you're actually not making improvement, right? If you take too long, if you pause it, you know how fast business works today. Somebody else will come along, right? As I said, you know, it's no longer the big eats the small, it's the fast eats the slow. So should you pause it? No.
Well, funny enough, I think Bob is pressuring this a wee bit. It's a good comment. And to be fair to Bob, he had this at 20 past, not just now. He continues with, do you think the technology providers are placing too much pressure on enterprises to accelerate their digital development? So kind of the contra. I know, you know, the swift don't get eaten, but the swift also trip and fall over and skin their knees very badly.
Yeah, well, we've all lived through the dot-com boom, which was quite a lot of tripping up of financial models, should I say, and business opportunities. Yeah, I think there is always going to be a drive for the next thing. I mean, the next thing at the moment is that word operational resilience. If you look in the job market at the moment, there's business continuity and job operational resilience, professional jobs going left, right, and centre, right? It's the buzzword at the moment. I think technology companies need to start actually offering solutions to the problem that's existing, and not creating new problems and ignoring the things they have to deliver.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it does very well. It's that classic tension. It's a bit of one and a bit of the other, and you've got to find the sweet spot in the middle, which is fair enough.
We can't stop commerce.
Yeah. Now, just before we move on to some other questions, I will ask that poll, folks. You've had a handle from Terry of 20 minutes, and you've really you've heard it there. So, having listened to Terry, you know, do you feel that yourself or your company, or I know there are a few consultants out there, perhaps answer in your own mind on how you feel about your clients. Do you feel yourself that you must do much more on operational resilience, a bit more, much the same, or absolutely nothing extra? And again, as ever, Terry, a very quick to make up their minds, fast information absorbing audience is well over the 50% mark already. I'll give it just a few more seconds before I close it down. Ooh, well, some interesting results coming up here. I'll just flash the screen, and oops, there we go. And you can see, wow, you seem to have convinced some 81% of the audience they've got more to do, and 22% much more. So it's a salutary reminder there. So thank you very much for that, Terry. Now we got a couple more questions I'd like to ask, if that's all right, before we have to wind up. And just one of the things that we're finding here is a question coming in. Really, are there any tools in the market to test and stress test the business processes? So anything you can see in that regard?
I think there are tools that potentially could help set a framework up for identification and stress testing, but it's more about actually making sure that you design the tool, the base tool to deliver for your business model. Right? Not every business model is exactly the same. Different departments, different ways of delivering different product sets. So is there a tool that would, I think I can name it. I'm not going to go and name products, but there is a couple out there that will help you, but you need to design it around your business. You need to design it first before implementing it.
Well, that question was from, my apologies, from Avishek Bimal. So apologies, Avishek, and thanks for the question. So again, on tools, do you use any tools?
Yeah, Excel, PowerPoint. No, yeah,
Right,
yes.
So okay, so roll your sleeves up and just get the job done. There's no magic software solution out there for you, anyway.
I think you can automate it. You can automate a lot of it, and there are some good workflow tools out there. But we are in the middle of developing a solution on a SaaS platform at the moment.
Okay. And I think possibly our final question, and another good one. This is from Bruno Azinha. Bruno's asking, the hyperscalers, which we're talking about. So we're talking about outsourcing and cloud earlier. So AWS, Amazon Web Services, Azure, Google. Now they all come in with the promise of simpler resilience, and almost all the challenges have been worked out from an infrastructure perspective. How true do you think this is, or how true have you found this in practice?
Okay, so let's put this all into one cloud providers, because there are so many different options and service providers and sub-service providers in it. Yes, they all are offering, all the major ones are offering 5 nines. They're offering multi-region, multi-country, that's great, right? But they've all had outages. There was a large organization that had a major outage, which was caused by a BGP change that they did themselves, which basically deleted themselves off the internet. And that organization not only deleted itself, but it also, because they are used for access to systems and access to their own buildings and their own computers, actually locked themselves out of their own buildings and their own computers. And they were out for about 8 hours. Right, so and what cloud providers do is they turn around and say, we've got 5 nines. They won't tell you what their recovery time objective is if they do have a major outage, because I've been trying to find that out, and I use all the major vendors. If they're out, they'll give you service credits, but what's the point of service credits?
Yeah, that's a good point.
If you miss your impact tolerance that you published to the regulator doesn't care whether you use a supplier A or supplier B, right? It's interesting. He doesn't care whether you're using computers or 1,000 people sat in the fence.
It's happened, yeah.
Yeah.
And just a quick question, if I may. This is also from Abhishek. I'm just squeezing in if you can do it in 20 seconds. But you've got here the scenarios, right? And then you've got the stress tests and the factors. How helpful have you found the FCA to give guidelines on, for example, what factors need to be stressed?
There is a whole wealth of information out there as to stress testing.
Good. Well, look, Terry, it's been absolutely super to have you on, because what I like is that from the coalface stuff, the answer is that no, don't get seduced. There are no tools. Be careful on the hyperscalers. Not that they're doing the bad thing, but where you are. I think you said at one point, operational resilience is business continuity on steroids, and I'm certainly going to remember that. There was another thing I think that we spoke about. What I took away from this was very much the idea that we were focusing in the past really on business continuity and the disaster sense, but now the focus really being pushed from the regulator is on a no distress delivery and then the orders shifted to, as we spoke about earlier, the citizen, as a citizen being taken care of, then the citizen as a consumer, and then the markets themselves, and then, oh, by the way, if the firm has survived, that's a good thing too. So I think we're seeing an interesting shift here, and I think I've picked up from the questions here in the audience that we're seeing a financial regulatory system that's moving into somehow trying to be an IT software development, security, quality assurance delivery standard. It's a really interesting change, and I'm glad that you put your finger on it.
Yeah, and the regulators, at the moment, the regulations are descriptive rather than prescriptive, but they will become prescriptive as they get more education from the market. So it will get tighter.
Good. Well, I've got 3 quick rounds of thanks, if I may. Firstly, may I thank our sponsors again. Absolutely delightful that you allow us to range widely and freely, but this is clearly a topic many of you have a deep interest in. My thanks to the audience. As ever, you've been superb. It's really nice to get these questions here and see where you want Terry and others to take the conversation. But and you can see the forthcoming events. As ever, just go to the website. I won't read them out. But may I say, Terry, our real thanks are to you. My stress test is the challenge of trying to figure out how to give many of our guests a decent round of applause. So I have here a Korean karmic clapper, as I call it, and this will have to do, I'm afraid, as a substitute for opening the floodgates, but I'll be passing on many thanks to you from the audience themselves as they've been typing them in here, and really appreciate your insights as somebody out there really getting the job done. Really appreciate it, and thank you very, very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.